Today's gospel reading starts off in a dramatic fashion. Now, when Jesus heard that John the Baptist had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. To the ears of our first century hearers, these are two profoundly bold and troubling statements that set the stage for what is about to happen. First, John the Baptist is in jail, and second, Jesus has withdrawn. It's kind of like the opening crawl in Star Wars. A long time ago in a galaxy far away, it's a period of civil war. Those words set the stage for where the story is told. Here in Matthew, we really find a similar treatment. We are being reminded that there are dark times, so that in turn we can be assured that the people who sit in darkness will indeed see a great light. Matthew sets the stage for us and then quotes the words from the prophet Isaiah that are today's Old Testament reading. Isaiah's words are words of hope written to people in a hard time. Isaiah is literally writing to people on the edge of darkness, and the prophet is recounting to them memories of other hard times that have ended well, as in the days of Midian. Which is great, but not that informative to those of us who do not know what the day of Midian was. It would be kind of like using examples from Star Wars for Isaiah, who, well, let's be honest, never saw the movie. See, the Israelites found themselves in a bad situation and overtaken by the Midianites, who some scholars believe were a nomadic group of God-worshipping desert dwellers who ran roughshod over the land. The Midianites came in with such force that the Israelites, a once great nation, were reduced to hiding in the mountains and trying to grow crops with very few resources and even less time. This is because when the Midianites saw crops growing, they would drag up the crops and destroy them, thus leaving the Israelites without any food. One day, God called a man named Gideon, and in the voice of an angel, the Lord said, "You will deliver Israel." Gideon responded out of uncertainty and out of fear. "You can't mean me, Lord," Gideon responded. And yet God responded with two statements. The first was that couldn't the God who led the Israelites out of Egypt also free them from the Midianites? And the second was that God promised Gideon that he would stand by him, supporting him and protecting him. The story is amazing. It's told in the book of Judges, the 6th and 7th chapters. Gideon's self-doubt and God's support. Gideon's insecurities and God's desire to show him that it was through the blessing, assurance, and faithfulness of God that all things happen, not simply human will and human action. And then, in a day's battle, Gideon, with a small army and more importantly, the support and protection of God, overtakes the Midianites and delivers his people back to their land, ending a dark time in the history of Israel through faith and through perseverance. Isaiah was writing in the 7th and 8th century BC, talking to people in the face of a world that was not perfect, and he was reminding them that God remains faithful, faithfully supporting, and coming through even when times seem dark and the odds appear to be insurmountable. Matthew, on the other hand, was writing in the 1st century AD, writing to early Christians after the ascension of Jesus, reminding believers like us that though things may not go the way that we expect, that God is still active and moving in the world. We hear both of these readings in the 21st century, with worries and woes all of our own. I don't need to remind anyone that the world is not perfect. We all know that, although by different means. It doesn't take a lot of time to ask or to answer the question, what's not perfect in your life? Or what worries you in the world today? We all have something. Though what we are here to be reminded of is that God overcomes all things, the same way that God always has. In the way that the darkest part of the night is right before daylight breaks, so too when the glory of God's plan shines forth, we can see how bright the future is, especially in contrast to the darkness that we are leaving behind. Consider this. Last week we heard the story of the call of Andrew as it was told in the Gospel of John. Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist when he left behind the comforts he knew at the Jordan to follow Jesus, to be in a life of motion and ministry. We know that he goes to get his brother. We know what happened to his brother, Peter, who we heard named in Matthew's account today. We know about Peter's discipleship and denial and papacy. Matthew then goes on to tell us of James and John, the sons of thunder, who were fishermen with their father Zebedee. They are mending the nets. The nets had torn, and that was how the family made their living. And so it was important that the nets be repaired so that the fishing could continue. The father and his sons were working there when Jesus comes by and calls the boys to follow him. Immediately, they left the boat and they followed Jesus. We read this passage and think about how this is a call story for these two early disciples when the fishermen became fishers of people. But I wonder how it felt to Zebedee in that moment to watch his sons leave, to watch the family business walk off the end of the pier. I'm sure it felt like a dark day when it happened, though eventually he saw God's plan too. Eventually, I'm sure he praised the day that his sons were called by the Son of God to spread the message of Jesus Christ to all the world, so that all may know him. Though that day, I'm sure it felt dark. Friends, remember your days of Midian. Those days that seemed so dark to you until you finally saw God's plan. The days when things seemed unpredictable, but then turned out for the best. The days when we finally caught up to what God was doing the whole time. And remember this, if you find yourself in a dark place today, that the people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. A light from a pillar that led the Israelites through the desert. A light from a star that led the wise men to the Christ child. And a light here at 730 Collingwood Avenue that paints the sky with a stained glass window that serves as a reminder in our town of faith, hope, and love throughout all of our days. Amen.